Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining today's webinar on promoting responsible recruitment of workers. We're really glad you can join us today to learn more about responsible recruitment. My name is Andrea Ackerman, and I am the Director of Civil Society Organization Engagement at the Fair Labor Association. The Fair Labor Association, or FLA, is a multi-stakeholder initiative that brings together civil society organizations, universities, and companies to promote decent work in global supply chains. I'm excited to introduce our guest speaker today, Andy Hall. Andy is a migrant worker rights specialist and advocate who has worked extensively on responsible recruitment efforts in Asia. Andy is internationally recognized as an activist and human rights defender, and he serves as a key advisor to companies, investors, trade unions, governments, and civil society. So we're grateful Andy has agreed to share his expertise with us today. We're also joined by Nate Herman, who's the Senior Vice President at the American Apparel and Footwear Association, or AAFA. And then from FLA, we're joined by my colleagues, Siv Thorgerson, who's FLA's Senior Director of Investigations and Engagement. We're also joined by Shelley Hahn, who's FLA's Chief of Staff and Senior Director of Engagement. And lastly, Kara Hagan, who's Director of Knowledge Management. So today's webinar is an accompaniment to the guidance document on responsible recruitment that you all hopefully received via an email from me yesterday. FLA has partnered with Andy to develop this guidance with the goal of providing detailed information on the recruitment process so that companies, governments, employers, and labor actors can all work together to eradicate fees for migrant workers and ensure that migrant workers gain the rightful benefits they should have from their work abroad. We hope that this guidance will be used to create an industry shift in how recruitment is paid for, and as a result, free workers from the risk of debt bondage and forced labor. As part of FLA's efforts to eradicate fees for workers, we've teamed up with AAFA to create the Commitment for Responsible Recruitment. The commitment is also an important piece of this effort because it commits brands to work with their suppliers to implement the employer pays principle. So I'd like to ask Nate to introduce the commitment in more detail. So Nate, I'll go ahead and briefly hand it over to you now.
Thanks, Andrea. And I'm really impressed with the guidance that Fair Labor Association and Andy, you put together. It's real, practical guidance to help companies address and protect foreign migrant workers in their supply chains. And that is a good lead-in to the commitment to responsible recruitment that American Apparel and Footwear Association, the Fair Labor Association, originally put together in 2018 and relaunched last year to, again, protect workers, foreign migrant workers in our supply chains. And it focuses on four main tenets. That the signatories agree that no workers pay for their job, workers receive a timely refund of fees and costs paid to attain or maintain their job, that workers retain control of their travel documents and have full freedom of movement, and that all workers, in a language they understand, are informed of the basic terms of their employment before they leave their country of origin. We already have 100 brands and retailers and manufacturers signed on to the revised commitment to responsible recruitment. We're always looking for more signatories. You can access the commitment and learn more about it at aafaglobal.org/commitment. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Andrea, and I'm very much looking forward to the webinar.
Great, thank you, Nate. So before I turn to Andy for the presentation, I would like to note that we have a Q&A box where you can enter any questions that you have there. Unfortunately, questions in the chat are difficult to keep track of, so please use the Q&A box function, and we should have plenty of time for discussion after Andy's presentation. So without further delay, I'd like to turn to Andy to give his presentation.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone from Asia. It's early in the morning in the US, but it's late here. I'm really grateful to the Fair Labor Association and also the AAFA to work together with me on this guidance note. And I hope that it will be something that's really practical and useful based on my experiences of working on these issues since, I think, 2015, when I first started working on these issues in Thailand. And I really do welcome the feedback from everybody directly or via FLA. We have an option for the question and answers also coming up. So I just want to give a brief introduction that actually the recruitment is really decisive in determining a worker's employment experiences. And it's one of the things actually that I had a long discussion with some of the trade unions related to the Qatar World Cup. Hopefully there's some unionists on the call today. That decent work really depends on responsible recruitment. And responsible recruitment also depends on decent work. So it's really difficult to have decent work in the workplace if a worker arrives, not consenting to the conditions in which they find themselves. The worker is in debt. And one of the things that we found during the Qatar World Cup, I mean, it was a very contentious event, but actually by the time the event finished, we actually saw the recruitment process into the Qatar World Cup actually getting worse. And we saw workers paying more for shorter term contracts. And, the Supreme Committee in Qatar said, that it was a legacy that they managed to remediate. I think it was $28 million in recruitment fees to workers. But really, it was a failure because it meant that the workers were still paying such high fees, and one of the things that unionists often focus on is conditions in the workplace and not on the way in which the workers are recruited. And it's really important to know that, forced labor stems from irresponsible recruitment many times. So we find that many of the conditions, when workers are in conditions of forced labor, you'll often find that it stems from their recruitment experience, the debt that they're in, the fact that they didn't consent to the work, the fact that they never saw their passports just when they were passing through the immigration. So I just want to really stress that when we talk about decent work, we have to have responsible recruitment. And when we talk about prevention of forced labor, we also need to have responsible recruitment. So I'm not going to talk a lot about the risks of irresponsible recruitment because I think everyone on the call is aware of those. But, placement fees and related costs, debt bondage, deception, contract substitution, workers arrive for a different job, a different employer, a different contract to what they agreed, threats and intimidation, really inhumane treatment during recruitment processes, limited freedom of movement, document confiscation. These are all kind of some of the main risks of irresponsible recruitment. And actually today we have a developing international standards on responsible recruitment that we continue to see, and I'm going to talk about that on the next slide. But there's really significant challenges in promoting responsible recruitment. And I think that's one of the reasons why FLA agreed to work together on this guidance document and also AAFA, because there's a recognition that there's still so many challenges in actually delivering responsible recruitment on the ground. And there's so many issues that don't seem to be solved. So many things that are confusing why we're still not being successful. And so I just wanted to share my experiences on the ground about the successful projects that I've been involved in and the challenging projects that I've been involved in to try to offer some support. Because we need recommendations also how to identify irresponsible practices. We know that workers don't want to talk about the fees they paid, they want to get a job. Maybe they've been recruited by an uncle or an auntie or even a sister or even, someone in their own family. So we really need to look at how to identify these practices because it's not always that easy. And responsible recruitment also means responsible business conduct, and it also means human rights due diligence. So, in the debate we're having today is all about, responsible business conduct, human rights due diligence, and the responsible recruitment debate is really so important in that issue. So what is responsible recruitment? Well, people call it responsible, ethical, fair recruitment. Actually, it's the same thing. I use the term responsible recruitment throughout this presentation. It's something that I'm more comfortable with, but other people will say ethical recruitment. The ILO refers to fair recruitment. So you can use whatever term you want. And it's broader than workers paying exorbitant costs or the employer pays principle. So a lot of people talk about the employer pays principle, workers shouldn't pay for their job. That's only one really small part of responsible recruitment. And there's a list, again, you can follow this in the guidance note. We have a Stronger Together's Responsible Recruitment Toolkit and the Clearview Standard. I put that at the top because it's kind of one of the most comprehensive and one of my favorites. And they have a lot of guidance material that's been developed there. We have the International Labour Organization's Fair Recruitment Initiative. We have the International Organization for Migration's International Recruitment Integrity System called IRIS, Fair Hiring Initiative, on the level certification scheme. And we have the Responsible Business Alliance, Responsible Recruitment Program, and Responsible Labor Initiative, which is linked to the RBA standard. There are also some other standards out there on responsible recruitment, but for me, these are the main standards that I use in my everyday work. And there was a recent SEDEX collective action requirement regarding the employer pays principle. We just saw this a few weeks ago. It's creating a big debate actually in the UK at the moment. SEDEX, which is one of the main international auditing standards, has just said that if you don't adopt the employer pays principle, it will be a corrective action, a non-compliance in your audit. And this will lead to something called a collective action requirement, which is a very interesting concept because it's a non-compliance, which you kind of don't need to correct yourself because it's a collective action requirement. And what that means is that you're not complying with the standard, but alone as a supplier or as a company, you can't comply. You need the support of the whole supply chain. So that's a new standard that's just been introduced. And some brands, buyers, and social compliance frameworks require responsible recruitment and or the employer pays principle. So the FLA, AAFA has just talked about theirs, also the RBA. And also it's often a subset of forced labor or voluntary employment standards. So although a lot of audit standards don't require responsible recruitment per se, they do require that the workers are not in forced labor. So that's it's in many other standards. So why has there been a lack of progress? And I really just want to share my experience on the ground. There's been more focus on responsible recruitment, more funding, more guidelines, more commitments. But really, there's been limited real world progress, really, really limited progress. Certification has been slow. There's a real gap between theoretical requirements and reality on the ground. If we look at the IOM IRIS program that has been funded for almost a decade now by the Swiss Development Corporation and other actors, they've only managed to certify one domestic worker agency in Singapore, actually after years. There's a few agencies that are coming up, maybe for certification, and that have passed the requirements, but one certified agency in 10 years. RBA has certified no agencies after many, many years of funding from Walmart Foundation and others. They still haven't certified any agencies at all. The Fair Hiring Initiative recently certified 2 agencies in Myanmar who are really having a challenge actually surviving financially because of the lack of a market for responsible recruitment. And they've recently certified an agency or a few agencies in Nepal. And Clearview has certified 3 agencies, I think all in the US. So we literally have 7 or 8 agencies that have been certified globally as responsible. And actually responsible actors, when I speak to responsible actors, I think of, for instance, Staff House in the Philippines or a couple of Nepali organizations, recruitment agencies, a couple of Myanmar agencies. Actually, they always say to me that they don't really see the benefit of being responsible because it's limited benefit, you know, for a sustainable business. With the exception, I think, of Staff House in the Philippines, that really is this leading responsible recruitment agency across the world, and they have a really good business model, but most agencies really don't see that much benefit in being responsible. And this is my understanding, is that there's a real misunderstanding on the cause of irresponsible recruitment. And it's a really important misunderstanding. I was discussing with a company the other day in Taiwan that I'm having a bit of a complex relationship with. And they said to me, if only those Myanmar agencies could sort the stuff out, we could do this properly. And I said to them, you know, it's been a decade I've been engaging you on these issues, and you still think that the problem is the Myanmar recruitment agencies. Of course, workers pay because of and to the source country actors. So it's a worker coming from Myanmar or Nepal or Indonesia or Vietnam, wherever, they're paying to the workers in the source country, but there is a fundamental misunderstanding of why they're paying the money. Most of the money that's being paid, in my experience, to recruitment agencies in source countries is kickbacks. It's money that is being sent to the destination country actors and to the employers. So the reason why the worker is paying so much money for their recruitment is often because of the destination country actors, recruitment actors or employers in the destination country. So when people focus on the source country, focus on the source country agencies as the root cause of the problem, in my experience, it's a complete misunderstanding of why workers are paying fees. And we'll talk about that in a minute in a bit more detail. So I said there's a root misunderstanding regarding the root cause of the problem, and that prevents effective, sustainable solutions. If you don't understand the problem, you won't be able to find the solution. And unfortunately, many people today, in my opinion, don't understand that the root cause of these problems is not the source country agents. So this concept of kickbacks, which again, I'm really grateful, for someone like FLA giving the space to discuss this, because kickbacks is a really sensitive issue, actually. There's limited demand for responsible recruitment. And that is because source country actors must pay kickbacks. They must pay money to destination country agents, to employers, to HR personnel to secure demands for recruitment. A kickback is essentially corruption. It's essentially a bribe. And source country actors are also not provided the full costs of responsible recruitment. Workers pay for recruitment as the costs are passed to them. So all of this money that the source country actors have to pay to the destination country actors, and we have an infographic that will show this in a minute, it's all passed to the workers. And I just give an example, of I live in Nepal, and I've also been, into some of the bars, when recruitment agencies have come from the Middle East or from Malaysia to recruit workers. And we have recruitment agencies and HR staff, mostly men, and they will come to Nepal. They will claim business class tickets. They will stay in 5-star hotels. They will go out every evening to karaoke bars and drink a lot of expensive alcohol. They will eat a lot of food. They will demand prostitutes. And all of that money is paid for by the workers. Not only that, they also have to hand over a lot of money to these agents from the destination country. And there's also a big issue here of financial crime and bribery, which is a really sensitive issue, but we have to address this issue when we're dealing with responsible recruitment in Asia, because it's really systemic, and it means that there's limited demand for responsible recruitment. Few actors consider the benefits of responsible recruitment. Responsible actors find it difficult to secure business. They simply can't secure business because they're not willing to pay the bribes. And so here is a infographic, which again is in the package. So I won't go through it in detail here, but this is a typical worker's journey, through the recruitment process, from the job search stage to the paying fees, skills training, document processing, pre-selection, interview selection, paperwork, pre-departure, final source approval, clearance, departure, arrival, post-arrival. And you'll see that we have a few logos here. One is corruption, one is fees, one is confusion, one is errors, one is document retention. But, this is a very typical process that workers will go through. And you'll see there so many red flags, at each of those stages. And again, this is in the guidance document, but it's just a visual of a typical recruitment process and the risks involved. And we have here this employer journey. So they decide to hire workers. They get government approval, and you'll see this flag with money. Often companies have to pay so much to the destination country for the approval to hire the workers. And actually, the corruption that they pay, it's amazing. Actually, when companies have to pay corruption costs to officials to secure quotas, they will actually say to the source country agents, you have to pay that cost as a deposit to actually recruit workers for us. So this money is passed on to the source country agent. And then they have to pay government fees. They have to hire recruitment intermediaries. And again, we'll talk about that later, the challenges of hiring recruitment intermediaries and the corruption involved in that. They have to secure source country government approval. And again, corruption. But I just want to say that the destination country and the source country, we have corruption in both countries. And of course, if you don't want to get involved in corruption, it's very difficult to hire migrant workers, particularly in Asia, but across the world. So we have to talk about this issue. But generally, the destination country corruption is so huge compared to the source country corruption. We can't compare, for instance, the amount of money that is passed to them in Malaysia or even in Thailand. We can't compare that to the smaller amounts of corruption, for instance, in Nepal or in Myanmar or in Indonesia. It's really different amounts of money. And then you have the recruitment process. And I said here, you know, destination country recruitment actors may be utilized by end user employers. Employers often outsource recruitment, and this really increases the governance and exploitation risks, both for the employer and for the workers. And we're going to focus on the risks of using a destination country recruitment actor. So this is just another infographic. And then this is a really nice infographic. It's a money relationship for responsible recruitment. We have a buyer, we have an employer, we have a recruitment actor, we have a worker. And actually the money should pass from the right to the left. So the buyer gives to the employer gives to the recruitment actor pays for the worker to be recruited. Buyers include it in their costs of responsible recruitment. They include it in their purchasing metrics. And the employer includes the cost of responsible recruitment in their quotations. The employer has service agreements with the recruitment actor to ensure adequate cash flow and profit to cover all the costs. The employer passes that money to the worker in that the employer actually covers all the worker's costs in the source country. And the recruitment actor is the one that's acting on behalf of the employer, and they cover all the costs of the worker. So the money should be going from right to left. But generally in, I would say 95, 97, 98% of cases that we see of recruitment globally, the money is going from right to the left, right? So it's going from the worker to the recruitment actor to the employer, obviously, usually not going to the buyer, but we want it to go the other way, and that the buyer is giving the money to the employer, who's giving it to the recruitment actor, who's giving it to the worker. So we need to see more of the money relationships in this way. So how to monitor recruitment? We have a lot of challenges in identifying recruitment difficulties. It's not easy to do. And monitoring only happens often when the worker arrives at the workplace. And so we need specific techniques for monitoring and specific issues to look out for and to request during audits. So we're going to look into that. Brands, buyers, and investors are the ones who have a really important role here. They're key to incentivizing responsible recruitment. Targeted, informed engagement with supply chains is pivotal in contributing to fair, transparent business environment for responsible recruitment to emerge. Actually, we want a responsible recruitment market to emerge globally, and it doesn't exist at the moment. It's an irresponsible recruitment market that exists at the moment. And it really needs to be buyers, brands, and investors who have such an important role in incentivizing the creation of a responsible recruitment market. And we need to ensure and monitor and demand responsible recruitment. It's something that needs to come from the top down. And suppliers, end user employers will then demand and ensure through suitable labor sourcing practices responsible recruitment. If it's not the demand of the brands and the buyers and the investors, it won't happen. And at the moment, really what we see is brands and buyers and investors just talking about responsible recruitment, but actually on the ground, they're not monitoring and they're not actually ensuring it. Maybe they're demanding it from their suppliers, but actually they're not really promoting it. They're not really supporting. So this guidance document, which I'm now going to walk us through, it won't provide more comprehensive and prescriptive advice. You know, most companies and many of the companies join the call already have extensive responsible recruitment policies, pages and pages and pages. And the existing programs that exist around the world, there's just thousands of pages of material on how to do responsible recruitment. So I'm not going to try to invent any of that. I'm going to provide 15 key markers that I think are crucial for delivering responsible recruitment. I will provide some advice on how to effectively monitor for responsible recruitment. I will provide ways to promote ethical recruitment markets through something which I call an open and transparent tender process. I will highlight critical areas to prioritize in developing, implementing, and monitoring recruitment processes. And the guidance will complement certification programs. It doesn't need to be something that's opposed to the existing certification programs, but it's something that hopefully can complement those. And really what we need to do now with this guidance, hopefully it will be used for responsible recruitment pilot projects around the world. We really need to see more companies piloting responsible recruitment projects because we really don't see that at the moment. So this is our 15 key markers. Which we're going to go through one at a time, obviously not in that much detail. And hopefully these markers will be something that will support everybody to do more responsible recruitment. So number one is to ensure a good governance-focused responsible recruitment policy. As I said, most of the companies already have responsible recruitment policies, but I'm asking for something more. Policies need to be consistent with ensuring good governance and preventing corruption. Policy commitments are the start of the process. A lot of companies have policy commitments. We have the leadership group on responsible recruitment saying that by 2025 or 2026, the employer pays principle will apply. But these policy commitments are only the start of the process. They're just a paper. There's many actors involved and many more actually than required. And as I talked about already, this kickback process is prevalent and corruption really undermines the implementation of policies. So in the responsible recruitment policies, I'm suggesting that there should be explicit language that the company does not engage in or become complicit in corruption or financial crime. We know that most of the recruitment involves corruption and financial crime. And so it needs to be specific in a company's policy. Focus on good governance must be included in responsible recruitment policies. And what I'm actually suggesting here is that there needs to be a specific mention in companies' policies of the risks of kickbacks and the need to prevent these costs being paid. And it really can be a significant damage can result for brands, buyers, and suppliers when they get involved in this whole mess of irresponsible recruitment. I've been involved in some really high-profile cases involving huge electronics companies, bicycle companies, so many different companies, food companies that have ended up in a really difficult situation, losing business because of the fact that actually, even though they had a good intention, they didn't monitor the process, and kickbacks, corruption was involved in their process, and it ended up in workers being in a very, very difficult situation. So how do you prevent kickbacks? Actually, it's not so difficult. And it's something that really needs to be prevented from the top of a company, from the CEO level, from the real top of the company, because often it may well, of course, sometimes the tops of the companies are involved in this, but it's quite rare. Most of the time, it's something that the company is not aware of. So recruitment processes need to be interactively agreed with input from experts and stakeholders in advance. So we really need clarity on the recruitment stages, the costs, the timelines, the responsibilities. And I talk about this a lot through the guidance note: recruitment stages, the costs, the timelines, the responsibilities. These are really, really complex issues, very, very detailed issues, and they need to be negotiated and they need to be triangulated. You don't believe what your agent tells you. You don't believe what your HR tells you. You don't believe what any one individual tells you about a recruitment process because they're very complex. So we need to negotiate these processes and we need to triangulate them. Recruitment costs should always be paid through banking systems by the employer. This is also very important. There needs to be paperwork. There needs to be money transfers that you can actually see. And payments and processes need to be monitored by the employer. And it requires documentation. It requires constant vigilance. Even money transferred can be withdrawn and paid back. This is something that often happens with responsible recruitment. And buyers can require transactions when monitoring their supply chains. If a buyer is committed to responsible recruitment, they should be auditing and monitoring their supply chains by actually requiring physical evidence that the company paid for the responsible recruitment. Who did they transfer the money to? Where did they transfer the money? When did they transfer the money? You actually need to see their evidence. And the burden should be placed on suppliers to prove that they do responsible recruitment, not on the worker to prove that they paid money. And actually, there should never be a situation, in my opinion, when a destination country recruitment agency or an intermediary is responsible for paying a source country agency. The cost should always be paid directly by the employer to all the actors. We have so many cases when the employer pays all the money to the destination country agent or intermediary, who's then supposed to pass that money down the supply chain, but they never do. So it's really essential that the employer pays everybody involved directly, not using intermediaries and via the bank. And there's a real opportunity here to develop recruitment costs, processes, and timelines by corridor. So we really need to help employers, help buyers, by developing these recruitment cost processes and timelines by corridor. Second one is the direct worker sourcing policy. Actually, responsible recruitment, it means responsible recruitment, right? And it means that your recruitment actors should be recruiting people. Many times, the people in your recruitment supply chain actually do nothing. The destination country agencies are just using paperwork, passing paperwork. Even the source country agents in the capitals, maybe in Kathmandu, in Jakarta, in Yangon, in Chennai, actually, they're not doing anything. They're not recruiting anybody. They're just sitting on a table in an office, often with air conditioning. It's very hot in Asia, but they're not actually recruiting anyone. They have sub-agents. They have other intermediaries. So we need to be doing this thing called direct worker sourcing. So we need to ensure direct sourcing of candidates complying with the local regulations. Workers have limited literacy and experience and live in remote areas. And again, we're talking about low-skilled or lower skilled workers. Most of the recruitment that's being done is of these workers who have limited literacy and experience. It's the workers who are most low skilled who are most vulnerable, and they have limited literacy, limited experience. They live in remote areas. So they utilize intermediaries, brokers, sub-agents, relatives. They're referred by other workers because they simply don't have connection with the agents in the cities. And so they charge fees or inflated costs, and it's really hard to detect due to culture and also due to the coaching. With some exceptions, and I think Myanmar is probably one of the only exceptions that I'm aware of, recruitment intermediaries are totally illegal and they should be prohibited. There should be no use of brokers, sub-agents, in the process. They're not allowed. The only people who should be recruiting are recruitment agencies, but actually we see most of the time, they're not recruiting anybody. It's intermediaries that are doing it. So we need to have local campaigns to actually seek out candidates in villages. We need to have job fairs in communities. Branch offices may be useful when they're allowed. We consider the use of technology and the literacy challenges that were involved. In some cases, we have seen positive examples of technology being used as a means to recruit workers successfully. And the employer should be involved as much as is practically feasible in actually recruiting workers. And agencies should follow the local laws. So just some strategies. Sourcing strategies are so important to ensure responsible recruitment, and they have to be discussed and agreed upon in advance between the employer and the recruiter. We need a clear strategy. So whenever I do a project, we have to sit down and we have to understand in detail how the recruiter will recruit the workers. And that needs to be agreed in advance, because sometimes the focus on direct candidate sourcing strategies will result in higher costs. We're asking the agencies to go to the villages, we're asking the agencies to go to the communities. We're asking them to use maybe some kind of advertising technology. So it can cost more money and it will result in a higher cost. And at the beginning, but once agencies actually get a reputation, then workers will be flocking to be recruited at zero cost. But at the beginning, it can be very difficult. And you need a list of certified recruitment actors to ensure compliance and knowledge. What I mean is that when you start a recruitment process, you need a list of every person who will be involved in that recruitment process from the agent. And we need to train those people. We need to ensure their compliance with our policies. And we can't have other people becoming involved in the recruitment process. And we also need to limit the number of candidates. We should have no more than 5–10% who end up keep in view, who end up to be waiting in case someone drops out. So, we really need to focus on how many candidates we want. And actually, your recruitment agency, when the employer goes to source workers, we should aim for 100% selection. The employer should go, they should meet the workers and they should select. And if the recruiter is doing a good job, the workers that they bring to the selection interview should match 100% with what the employer needs. So we have to really focus on the sourcing strategy to ensure that the agent gets the workers that the employer needs. And again, referral systems are really risky, and referrals should not be given privileged treatment. A lot of companies, they have this belief that workers referring their relatives is a safe way to do recruitment. In my experience working in Asia, some of the most abusive situations that we found in responsible recruitment pilot projects are when the employer uses a referral system. Everyone suddenly becomes someone's uncle or auntie or sister or brother, but actually they're not. They're just using it. And also we've seen many cases where existing workers in the factory will take money from workers that they refer. So it can be a really risky sourcing strategy. And again, when brands require evidence as part of their audits, they should require evidence of a negotiated sourcing strategy when monitoring, when doing the audits. They should demand evidence that this has been thought out before the recruitment process starts. And as I said, it becomes much easier once an agency is established as responsible. And again, case studies, so many case studies. For instance, there's a website now in Nepal that's really been very successful in bridging a gap between workers in the communities and recruitment agencies. There's a lot of agencies that have gone and done job fairs. Even recently, there was a case when there was an earthquake in Nepal, and one of the agencies actually went to the earthquake zone to recruit the workers. And, because they were in poverty, they didn't have houses. And so, you need to see your recruitment actor actually recruiting. And it might seem a simple thing, but most recruitment actors today, they don't recruit anybody. So we really need to move to a strategy of direct sourcing of candidates from the community. Okay, do not confiscate or retain workers' personal documents. We need a timeline agreed at the beginning of recruitment processes. When will the workers' documents be given back? How long will they need to be held on to by the recruitment actor? Actually, recruitment actors hold on to workers' documents because they want to ensure that they depart. Even with responsible recruitment projects, if a recruitment actor has given so much money to the worker in terms of they've invested so much money, they want them to depart. And so they keep the documents to ensure that the worker departs, because if the worker doesn't depart, they won't get paid, or maybe even they'll be fined. And so we can't just say to a recruitment actor, don't confiscate workers' documents. We have to find a solution. And that means we have to ensure the terms and conditions of payment of costs for the recruitment process are separated from the fee. So what I mean is that the payment of the recruitment agency should not be linked to the departure of the worker. This enables risk sharing. And again, it might seem a bit of a strange thing, but in all the recruitment projects that I'm involved in, the company guarantees that every worker that's recruited, selected by them, the process will be paid by the company. The process of medical, the transport costs, the accommodation costs, everything will be paid, whether the worker departs or not. So the thing is, there's no incentive for the agent to withhold the worker's documents, because the employer has committed that all of the costs will be covered by them. If the worker doesn't depart, the only thing that the agency will lose is their recruitment fee. They won't lose any of the costs involved. So it means that if a worker runs away, if a worker doesn't depart, if a worker doesn't turn up to the airport, if a worker fails the medical test, if a worker fails a security test, the employer will still cover all the costs for the agent. And actually, there's this concept that so many workers will run away, so many workers will abuse the process, so many workers will abuse the good intentions of the employers or the buyers. But actually, in most of the recruitment projects that I'm involved in, and I think I've been involved in probably about 60 or 70,000 workers since 2015, the dropout rate or the rate of workers not departing, often you can count it on one hand, I've been involved in recruitment processes recently in Nepal in the last few weeks, probably almost 2,000 or 3,000 workers. And I think there's 4 or 5 workers that didn't depart. So it's really not this big issue that if you pay the costs for the workers, they won't depart. Use of consent form is essential. We always need the consent form when you're taking workers' documents. And documents, once utilized, they should be returned without conditions and in a convenient manner for workers. And often documents can be photocopied. You don't need the original documents. So, we see many processes, for instance, in Nepal, when the worker comes for the interview, their documents are photocopied and you never need that document again. And again, you give the document back when it's convenient to workers. So you don't try to force a worker to come all the way from an island in eastern Indonesia or a mountain in eastern Nepal to come and collect their document. It's not the way you do it, but you have to do it in a way that's convenient for workers. And you require evidence of document retention policies and practices when you're auditing. Training programs on responsible recruitment. You organize capacity building and mentoring programs to ensure relevant staff management knowledge. And again, lack of capacity on the language of social compliance for many auditors. They don't understand language of social compliance. They don't understand issues like forced labor. They don't understand issues like modern slavery. You really need to simplify and prioritize small group mentoring rather than general trainings to ensure practical skills are developed. Agencies have been trained for so long in big groups by general training that focuses on theory. And I never focus on the theory in my pilot projects. I simply mentor people. So we work as small groups. We bring a few people around the table and we use practical skills to try to develop their processes. And again, training is not a concept that I'm familiar with or comfortable with. For me, it's always about mentoring. And training should be given to all actors who are relevant. Training of trainers should be the option. So it should be a cascaded training process. You train one person who then trains another. So for instance, the brand can train the supplier, who should train the recruitment agencies, who should train the recruitment intermediaries, you know? So any recruitment intermediaries, if they're used. So we should have this cascaded level of training. It shouldn't be buyers and brands training recruitment actors. It should be a cascaded approach. And you need to decide what knowledge is needed and by whom. So much of the language of the IRIS, you know, of the IRIS scheme, or so many of the language of a lot of the theory around responsible recruitment, the agent simply doesn't need to know it. And you give them 100% information, they will take in 5%. So you need to decide what knowledge is needed by whom and when. If you're working with a recruitment actor for the first time, the amount of information that they need, what you need is you have to just focus on the primary crucial issues. And you always need to request evidence of training records and materials to show that the training is really being done. This is also a really important marker, is to allocate the appropriate budget for responsible purchasing practices. You need to allocate an appropriate and sustainable budget to ensure responsible recruitment. And this is something that's crucial for brands and for buyers and for suppliers. If you're not willing to put the money into responsible recruitment, it won't happen. It's impossible. That's not to say money solves everything. You can throw money at it, it won't work. But you have to have the money. It's the essential factor. And you need to ring fence the costs for price negotiations with buyers. So whether it be in the construction industry with the tenders, or whether it be in the garment industry, you need to ring fence the cost of responsible recruitment, and you need to negotiate based on the real costs. Often agencies will underestimate costs to secure the demand in a competitive market, and there'll be so many non-budgeted costs which will be passed on to workers. And the solution, again, which I will speak about in a minute, is an open tender process and the triangulation of the costs. So we need to really be transparent in costing. The cost should be contained in agreement prior to recruitment and changed where appropriate. Often recruitment process will change, regulations will change. So the cost will also change. And you need to have a sustainable profit to promote responsible versus irresponsible recruitment. You have to incentivize recruitment, responsible recruitment, or it's not going to happen. And we have to admit today that most of the responsible recruitment actors, probably, as I said, with the exception of, as I'm aware, of a staff house maybe in Philippines, it's much more profitable to be irresponsible than what it is to be responsible. And responsible recruitment actors can cost actually less than irresponsible ones. The overcharging unnecessary actors, unnecessary costs. In the processes that I was involved in recently, a glove company recruited about 800 workers, and they took out the Malaysian agent from the middle of the equation, and they saved almost more than $500,000 by taking out an unnecessary actor from the process. And again, you need evidence of the objective budget allocation and responsible purchasing. This is a controversial one, but it's something that is really important for me based on my experience. Whenever I work on a pilot project, I have a condition, which I have stuck to until today, that no destination country recruitment actor or intermediary should be involved in responsible recruitment. And that's, I'm dealing with big companies. I'm dealing with companies that are hiring 20,000 workers, 10,000 workers, 1,000 workers, 500 workers. And there's no need for these companies to use destination country recruitment actors. They should be doing this themselves. It's such a big part of their production. It's such a big part of their modern slavery risk that this all needs to be brought in-house. So we need to have an employer and we need to have a source country recruitment actor. There should be no destination country recruitment actor or intermediary. And of course, in some circumstances, a company may choose to use a destination country recruitment actor. And I have seen responsible recruitment projects where there is a destination country recruitment actor. But it really is a huge risk, and it's something that people need to consider. So avoid destination country actors and bring recruitment in-house. This is for big companies. I'm not talking about small SMEs who simply don't have the capacity. Recruitment in big numbers, it needs to be an integral part of the business. Destination country actors, unfortunately, are vehicles for corruption. And actually, there's a lot of money that needs to be paid to governments for quotas. And so often destination country actors are considered essential as a means to negotiate with government. You pay the recruitment actor a legitimate fee, and then they deal with all the mess that happens. But they really are vehicles for corruption, both for the employer themselves. So often HR staff will use the destination country actor as a vehicle for corruption. Remove them as unnecessary, or when essential, closely monitor them. De-link destination country recruitment actors from housing, transport, and welfare provisions. We have situations where workers' recruitment, housing, transport, and welfare is all managed by the same actor. And that's a real conflict of interest. If a destination country recruitment actor is utilized, which I always recommend for big companies, they are not, you need to use an open tender process, which we'll talk about in a minute. Check their legal status, and they should not be an intermediary for payment. So payment between an employer and a source country actor should never come by a destination country actor because it's really, really risky. And require suppliers to commit not to using destination country actors or prove evidence that such actors are essential. Okay, this is a central part of my model, is an open tender recruitment agency selection process. We need to promote the transparent selection of recruitment actors, to promote good governance, to ensure the most professional service, to ensure value for money, and to promote responsible recruitment. So an open tender process is essentially, and again, we have a diagram at the end of the guidance note. At the moment, the HR or the managers generally subjectively appoint agencies linked to long-term, non-transparent, uncompetitive pricing, reduced service quality, and there's risks of bribery and kickbacks. Workers have paid recruitment fees for so long, they've paid it to the same actors, and the same HR are benefiting. So when I come into a recruitment project with a big company, I say we need to wipe the slate clean. We need the best recruitment actor who offers the best value for money and the best professionalism. And in order to do that, we need an open tender process. It's essential that recruitment contracts are not awarded based on the ability of the recruitment actor to pay bribes. And that's what happens at the moment. So we need an objective standard open tender process conducted with due diligence. We need to incentivize responsible actors. They have the skills, they have the professionalism, they have the value for money recognized with business opportunities. Many of the responsible recruitment actors today in Asia cannot get business simply because they're not willing to pay the bribes. So we have to completely revamp the process. And we need to require objective pre-sourcing assessments, self-assessment questionnaires, audit frameworks, corrective action plan frameworks. We need to open the recruitment opportunities to everybody. And we need to require evidence of open tender processes when auditing and monitoring. So buyers should be saying to their suppliers, we need evidence that you're using the best recruitment actors who give the best value for money. It should be a condition. This is also really important, create a realistic recruitment timeline and payment schedule. The sustainability and viability of responsible recruitment depends on realistic timelines and realistic cost payment schedules, a business model recognizing cash flow limitations. You need to agree realistic recruitment timelines in advance to avoid bribes. If you want to shortcut things, you will have to pay bribes. So you need to understand what is the process, how long it will take. Responsible recruitment is actually less flexible than irregular processes because you're trying to do things by the book, by the law. So often it won't be as fast as an irresponsible process. And you have to have compliant deployment timelines, minimizing risk to workers, and then you need to avoid excessive recruitment. So you should only recruit once you know that you need the workers. We see so many times companies will recruit workers and then not deploy them. And that often breaches, many companies say a worker should be deployed within 3 months of being selected. And recruitment costs need to be advanced at different stages of the recruitment. And again, this is something which may seem strange to recruitment actors, It may feel uncomfortable for employers, but if a recruitment actor is going to responsibly recruit workers, they have to be paid in advance because they cannot shoulder all of these costs in advance without some kind of advance payments. You're asking the recruitment actor to pay all the costs for the workers in advance, and then you only want to pay them maybe 90 or 120 days after the worker arrives. They simply don't have the cash flow. And many of the agencies that have the cash flow to be able to pay all of this money upfront, they're often the work agencies that have so much money. You have to ask why they have so much money, why they have so much free cash to be able to pay everything in advance without requesting the payment from the employer. So we have to advance the costs at different stages of recruitment. In many of the processes that I'm involved in, 50% of the costs are given to the recruitment actors when you sign the demand at the beginning of the process. The flights are paid by the employer. Invoices are cleared within 10 or 15 days. And people may say, oh, that's so risky, giving all this money in advance to the recruitment actor. What happens if they then take money from the workers? Of course, it's a legitimate concern. But in reality, I have found that this is a really successful model. And I haven't seen problems in the way in which this has been applied. And again, it's essential for managing cash flows, as candidates are not paying any costs and candidates are not allowed to make any deposits. You can't take a candidate's passport. So it means that you have to incentivize for the agent. Invoices need to be cleared promptly. Standard payment terms and conditions do not allow adequate cash flow. You need to cover the flight costs to avoid the challenges of having large payments that you have to make. And you require explanation of timelines and payment schedules when monitoring the recruitment process. We're coming towards the end, just a few more, because I know I have 45 minutes allotted, so I think I'm almost there. You need to impose realistic warranty conditions on recruiters also. This is just so important for responsible recruitment, and it aligns with responsible purchasing practices and realistic payment schedules. You need to negotiate service agreements laying down fair terms and conditions of shared responsibility and warranty with your recruitment actors. If warranty conditions are stringent, there's a risk to workers' freedom of movement, deposits, passport confiscation. If you say to an agent, you are responsible for everything. You are responsible if the worker doesn't depart. You are responsible for the worker if they run away. You're responsible for the worker if they're no good. Then the natural, and you have to pay all the costs in advance as well. The natural thing is that the agent will hold on to the workers' documents. They will try to force them to depart. So you have to really look at the warranty conditions that you're imposing on your agents, because it is a real risk to the workers. And again, I want to stress here that in my recruitment processes, it's the employer that selects the worker. It's the employer that chooses the candidate. It's not the recruitment actor. So the employer is the one that's saying, we want this worker. If that worker then turns out to be unsuitable, if the worker doesn't depart, you can't put all the responsibility on the recruiter, because the employer was the one that selected that worker. Recruitment actors actually often shoulder unfair burdens, and they are punitively punished with penalty clauses. The recruitment actors in my recruitment projects are liable only for the actions or omissions within the field of control. We don't hold recruitment actors for liable for things that they cannot control. They cannot control whether a worker departs. They cannot control whether a worker runs away. And they're also not the one that selects the worker. So that's really important, that they shouldn't. And I was in a recruitment project once when it started. And when the management actually looked at the cost, the recruitment, they actually found that the recruitment actors actually owed money to the employer because of this penalty clauses. And you need to require evidence in contracts of a fair warranty system. This is also really important, is independent third-party monitoring and verification, including grievance mechanism. All of my projects use third-party monitoring during recruitment and on arrival. Workers will not disclose costs and fees unless they trust. More trust in intermediaries. They trust more the brokers. Third-party monitors, former migrant workers is the best example. Migration Trustee in Nepal is a really good example of former migrants that have set up a consultancy to do the monitoring. But also it can be trade unions, it can be civil society. And we use these third parties to build trust and confidence in the candidates, and disclosure is not punished. So if a worker paid fees, they should always depart, but you should ensure that they are paid back first. Independent stakeholders with in-depth understanding help to overcome the challenges and the risks. Independent third-party grievance give platform to candidates to raise their voices. Independent monitoring improves recruitment-related challenges continually. Independent monitoring can pick up challenges in the recruitment process continually. And there's 3 stages of monitoring when we use these independent monitors. Post-selection, after they're selected, we counsel them. Pre-departure, we counsel them. And then post-arrival again, we counsel them. And again, we call this counseling, you know? It's actually really complex to get workers' trust, and we need to counsel them. We need to help them. We need to support them. Hotlines can be useful, as is third-party involvement in planning, pre-selection, briefings, and pre-departure orientations. Coercive techniques, including audio and video recording, need to be avoided because they're not at all useful. And we need to encourage agencies to have their own internal grievance and whistleblowing mechanisms, make external channels available also, but do not overdo it. I've been involved in projects where the brand, the buyer, the supplier, the recruitment actor, the third party, all have hotlines. And we've had projects where there's been 5 hotlines for one recruitment drive, and that's really not useful. You just need very basic systems. And note the limitations of technology or worker voice tools and solutions. You cannot solve these problems without trust, and just using technological gimmicks and thinking that workers will just ring up and report things, it's not realistic. Okay, maintain a fair and open candidate selection process during recruitment. Candidate selection should be fair, non-discriminatory, and objective. Frequently, the workers that pay the most get selected, and that's really negative for the employer. And the solution is objective selection processes with confidence and trust building. Selection is based solely on objective criteria, and this really prevents workers paying money. We select a worker based on clear objective criteria. We have a score, we have a criteria, and they should be selected based on that. The best workers should get the job. Equal opportunity based on the ability to do the job, not willingness to pay or referrals. Pre-selection by authorized staff, final selection by employers, no rights given to the recruiter to recruit, to actually select the worker unless they are fair and objective in the process. And require evidence of this standard. Monitor job adverts, screening, shortlisting, testing, interview notes, selection materials. You need to prove that you're objective in your recruitment process. No first come, first serve recruitment. Fair and objective selection processes enhances reputation and reduces risk. Provide adequate, accessible information on employment. Information provided on terms and conditions of employment is enough to ensure the informed consent of the worker. The amount of information should increase during the recruitment process. Often workers are sleeping, inattentive, inappropriate language, uncomfortable settings, workers with limited literacy. Advertisements need to contain essential, accurate information so that workers can make informed decisions. The exact nature of the information depends on the nature of the recruitment and the candidate's literacy levels. Advertisements should always be improved by employers, and you should agree on an accurate package of information. Interactive briefings in the language workers understand, job offer letters, PDO contracts, they all need to be in language that workers understand. Provide the draft contract following selection so the worker has a lot of time to consider it. And candidates should be tested on their understanding to encourage attention using quizzes. So, you know, you shouldn't just speak to workers and then assume they know it. You need to test them. You need to understand, and you need to test yourself that your methods are actually helping workers to understand. And you need to require evidence of accurate, adequate information provided to candidates in interactive fashion. Okay, guarantee access to remedy and accountability mechanisms. Remedies should be provided prior to a candidate's departure, and there should be accountability for intentional and unethical recruitment. Irregularities should be detected and remedied prior to a candidate's departure, and this contributes to holding recruitment actors accountable. I use the impact principles and guidelines for repayment. Here is outlined in the guidance note. When unethical recruitment practices occur, there needs to be investigations and there needs to be accountability. It's not limited to just paying back the money. Disciplinary procedures, prosecutions need to be involved to deter future unethical conduct. Embassies, local authorities, brands, and buyers need to be notified. When people do wrong, they need to be held accountable and they need to be taken out. Evidence of disciplinary procedures or accountability should be requested. Just 2 more. Encourage source country agency due diligence practices towards end user employers. What this means is that employers should facilitate, participate, and cooperate in due diligence processes by recruitment actors. It means that recruitment actors must visit the workplaces as part of the pre-recruitment planning. Recruitment actors who understand the employer operations, experience of workers, terms and conditions of employment are more effective to accurately advertise the job opportunities to ensure the workers' full and informed consent. So we often have, a situation where recruitment actors have never actually been to the place that they're recruiting for. So we need to incentivize responsible recruitment by requiring evidence that recruitment partners have visited work sites prior to recruitment. And the last one is encourage humane treatment of workers. And this is something that I'm really passionate about, because my recruitment process is not like herding sheep, through a field, and often we see workers are treated really inhumanely. It's not only about preventing harsh, demeaning treatment. We also need to humanize the recruitment process, and we need to respect and we need to value the workers. So we need to provide adequate facilities for workers: space, ventilation, seating, rest areas, clean toilets, water, refreshments, snacks, and meals. We actually really need to see the worker as a customer. We shouldn't be seeing workers going without food. We should, keeping a space in a recruitment queue for like 12 hours without food, without any place to sit down, without any place to go to the bathroom, without any place to have water. So I really like to see the recruitment processes that I'm involved in as humane experiences. We really need to see the workers as human beings, and we need to treat them accordingly. So that's a very quick run through of the 15 markers that I explained in more detail. And there's also a lot of case studies in the guidance note. So I think it's a great opportunity probably to hand back to Andrea and to take some questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Andy, for that thorough overview. So we do have a lot of really good questions coming into the Q&A box. Please continue submitting those and we'll try to get to them. So Nate, Shelley, Siv, also please feel free to chime in during the Q&A if you have insights to share. So I'll combine a few questions where I can. And so the first questions are, practices of irresponsible recruitment are longstanding practices in certain parts of the world. And this participant noted, in particular, Central America. Do you agree that these instilled beliefs can be changed with trainings over and over again to employers and workers, plus sound monitoring? And ultimately, what approaches or strategies have you observed that effectively address challenges that exist due to cultural or systemic norms and practices?
Yeah, no, this is really important. When we started some of the responsible recruitment projects that I'm involved in, the workers would come up to us and say, we don't believe this process because if we're not paying, we're being scammed, we're going to end up in a call center or in some kind of terrible situation in a destination country. And we really had to change the mentality of the workers, like even when I was in the villages doing the recruitment, and some of the candidates, they got rejected, and they would come to me and say, sir, if we pay you money, can we go, and I'm just like, it's not like that, and it's really essential that workers have to trust the recruitment actors, and they have to trust that paying the money will not help them, In some cases, even if you pay money, we have to sometimes threaten some workers, and say to them, if you pay money, you won't depart, because we need to de-incentivize this payment. But definitely we need to change the mentality of the workers. And the only way we can do that is to try to get them to trust the recruitment actors, And I think that, definitely the projects that I'm involved in and the agencies that I'm working with and the employers. I was recently working with one of the glove makers that was sanctioned by the US government, for forced labor. And their system of recruitment was awful. And because of the pressure from the US government, they completely reformed their recruitment processes. And the workers that departed recently were just so happy, and they didn't pay any money, and they understood the terms and conditions. So I completely believe that it's possible to overcome all of these challenges, but there needs to be a real commitment, and there also needs to be a lot of support, to the recruitment actors, because there are a lot of challenges, and there needs to be constant encouragement to the candidates also. They need to be constantly reminded that they don't need to pay anybody, that, you got this job because you are the most appropriate person for the position that you've been selected for. There's absolutely no benefit in paying any money because it won't help you. You can pay the sub-agent if you want, but it's not any benefit for you because it's not going to help you at all. And it's something that really needs to come from the top down, Of course, you do have some recruitment actors that change things from the bottom up, but in reality, it's that relationship between the employer and the recruiter, where the recruiter needs to know that they need to deliver according to the standard to keep the job. So I think it's really possible. And as I say, I think it's really important that workers need to have confidence and they need to have trust, you know, they need to have confidence that they got the job because of their own ability. And they need to have trust in the recruitment actors. So if you build up workers' trust and confidence, then it can be successful. But it takes a lot of effort, a lot of mentoring, and a lot of commitment. And we simply don't see that level of practical commitment from buyers, from brands these days. We don't see it. In some circumstances, some brands and buyers are really doing a lot of good work, and they really are working on the ground to try to ensure responsible recruitment. But in the majority of cases, it's just a responsible recruitment policy that's not being implemented on the ground.
So that's a good segue to my next couple of questions. So there are a few questions coming in around corruption. And so if corruption, at a destination country is so severe, systemic, and institutional by government officials, by VIPs, how can companies ensure ethical recruitment with the odds stacked against them? A few other questions around this are along the lines of, how can third-party monitors and grievance mechanisms work if workers are facing, intimidation and threats? And then suppliers often cite, a lack of local labor force, aging workers, a lack of interest from young people as reasons to recruit. So how can we encourage direct recruitment from companies under these types of conditions?
I mean, I think we have to be honest that corruption is endemic across many parts of the world, and whether it be in the UK seasonal worker scheme or the US seasonal worker scheme, Canada, Australia. We don't just talk about Asia, or Africa or, South America as being corrupt. It's across the whole world in different ways. But really, you can't recruit without discussing this issue. And whenever I do responsible recruitment projects, I have a page with two columns. One is the real costs, receipted costs, and one is the non-receipted costs. And it's essential, because if you ignore the corruption, if you ignore the costs that don't have receipts, then you can't ignore those costs because they're actually costs that need to be incurred. So you can't have 100% clean recruitment process, unfortunately, in most parts of the world, but you can plan for that. And actually, if you have a good time frame, you don't rush it, then you can avoid a lot of those corruption costs, If you're compliant, if you comply with the law, if you have the right percentage of migrant workers versus local workers, if you have good safety conditions, you have good accommodation, if you try to get your quota on time, if you don't try to rush officials, to do paperwork within 1 day, 2 days, then you can reduce a lot of the costs. And I think, in the responsible recruitment projects that I'm involved in, I have to be honest, there's still costs, that are having to be paid. I think of Indonesia, I think of Nepal, I think of Myanmar, I think of India, I think of Cambodia. And yeah, there's still a lot of costs that need to be paid that you don't have receipts for. So it's part of the process. I think third-party monitors, for instance, the third-party monitor, as I said, they will do counseling. So they will counsel the worker and they will try to support the worker to separate them from any intermediaries that are trying to take money from them. And it sometimes can be a process, We've had workers during the post-selection counseling saying that everything's fine. And then, it's only like literally the day before they'll ring up a hotline, because we always have a hotline. So as part of the recruitment processes, there's a hotline available 24/7. Right? It's not really 24/7 because the operators sleep at some point, but it is, you can contact it 24/7. You might not get the response straight away. And they can contact that hotline at any time during the process, and that really helps to detect the violations. But we have to be honest, it's not possible always to have 100%. You will still find workers who are paying intermediaries. You will still find workers who are who are in situations of coercion that you simply cannot detect. It's not 100% safe-proof process. But really, I'm really confident when I see the responsible recruitment projects that I'm involved in, that the amount of payments that are being made to intermediaries really drop. And that's because we try to build the confidence of workers that they're being recruited based on their own skills, and we try to build the trust in the process. And I think the issue about the local workers, yeah, I'm not sure I really need to answer that, because it's a whole different issue, you know, about why companies are employing migrant workers. It's a really different debate, you know. Of course, local workers, often local workers are not willing to do the work for the wages that are being offered. They're not willing to do the work in difficult conditions. We see that in Thailand, we see that in Malaysia, in Singapore, in many of the Middle East countries. Local people simply are not willing to do the work that migrant workers do. And migrant workers are willing to do it, and they're willing to stick to it and work hard. I mean, that's why they're employed, right? And you have levies and things like that that can be imposed. But I think that's a whole different topic. So I would prefer not to get involved in that, answering that question at the moment.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, so you mentioned that employers see little benefit from responsible recruitment. So what is the incentive, aside from moral obligation, for them to take the trouble to recruit responsibly? So really recognizing that key barriers that prevent companies from adopting responsible recruitment practices can be economic. How have you seen businesses balance financial limitations with ethical recruitment standards? And would you be able to share more details about the cost saving when doing responsible recruitment practices compared to not doing it?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, I just believe that no worker should pay for a job, right? And I particularly believe that no worker should pay for a manual job that is very hard, very hot, very demanding. You know, I just simply believe on a moral level that nobody should have to pay for a job, because these workers are so profitable for the companies as it is, you know, that the company should be paying for them to come and make profit from their labor, right? So it's just a moral obligation that companies do that. So I don't like to look at this from a cost benefit perspective, right? And people often say to me, how can you sell this to companies? I'm like, well, they just shouldn't do it, right? I mean, they should just recruit ethically. But of course, what I found is that responsible recruitment means that you get the worker that you want and the worker that you need. You'll often find that employers get the workers that pay the most. They don't get the workers who are the ones that they need. So I believe that there is a benefit for the employer in doing responsible recruitment, because they will recruit responsibly, and it means they will get a more appropriate candidate than if they do it unethically. So I believe that that's a benefit for the employer. Of course, you have reputational issues. We have a lot of companies in Malaysia, maybe some companies in other countries soon, that are going to face the WROs from the US CPB, blocking their goods coming into the US simply because workers are in debt bondage from recruitment fees. And if you're a company, and I'm sure some of those companies are on the call today who have faced the sanctions from the US, they will know what a headache it is to get off those sanctions and how much it costs them in terms of reputation, in terms of shipping costs, in terms of reputational damage, you know. So of course there's an incentive not to be on the front page of the Guardian or the New York Times or whatever. But also I think, you know, the responsible recruitment projects that I've done, and again, I'm talking about the ones I've done recently, because I cut out the Malaysian, when I do Malaysian projects, I cut out Malaysian agents, and Malaysian agents are really expensive. So you just cut them out from the process and you bring all the things in-house. And the cost savings for companies from bringing recruitment in-house are massive. You know, as I said recently, a project that I was involved in with 800 workers, a Malaysian employer saved $600,000 by simply removing the Malaysian agent from the equation, because you have so many unnecessary actors who are taking money. And if you clean the process, you make it more transparent, you make it more objective, you make it more fair, you make it more legal, and the costs will massively reduce. You know, when you look at the real recruitment costs vis-a-vis the charged costs, you will see how different they are. You know, workers are paying thousands and thousands of dollars for jobs that essentially processes that cost a few $100s. And I think also, I think that it's again, but I would say also it's really important that buyers, investors in brands, you know, they need to incentivize their buyers to do responsible recruitment. That is also really, really important because we don't see enough companies, buyers, brands actually covering the cost of responsible recruitment. And I can honestly understand some suppliers saying, well, it's just not in our economic interest to do responsible recruitment. And again, I'm not an economics expert. I'm not a brand. I'm not somebody who's involved in all the buying metrics. I can just talk from a very general level. But definitely, you know, buyers, brands, investors need to be the ones that are incentivizing a move to the employer pays principle or responsible recruitment principles, because it really, yeah. And again, also, we really need to incentivize responsible recruitment actors. You know, if you have responsible recruitment actors, like for instance, the first two agencies that were certified by the Fair Hiring Initiative in Myanmar, and I was involved in mentoring those agencies for many years since I was involved in a project with Thai Union, who used these agencies in Myanmar. We selected them, and they were the first two agencies to be certified by the Fair Hiring Initiative as responsible recruitment actors. And both of them, their situation now is just really, really poor because the market doesn't incentivize this kind of thing. So we really need to incentivize responsible recruitment, and we need to be giving more demand, and we need to be showing to recruiters that there's a benefit financially in recruiting responsibly.
Thanks, Andy. So there are a number of questions coming in about Taiwan. And so would you be able to speak to the situation in Taiwan a bit more, given that they legally do allow recruitment and service fees for migrant workers?
So actually, I recently went to Taiwan, and I recently went to Japan, you know, and I was horrified, you know, by what I saw, because I've really focused on Southeast Asia, and especially Japan, you know, like when I spoke to Indonesian and Vietnamese and Thai and Filipino agencies about the levels of kickbacks they have to pay to Japanese agents to source, I was horrified. You know, it's as bad as the Bangladesh-Malaysia corridor, you know, and the Taiwanese agencies and the Japanese agencies are amongst the worst that I've ever seen in terms of the fees that they're charging in terms of kickbacks. And these are countries that should have relatively regulated systems of governance, you know, like the financial crime that's being committed for those kickbacks. You know, I was speaking to one of the NGOs, one of the experts in Taiwan, SPA, you know, I think Lennon is on the call, and he was explaining to me about the process by which workers take out a loan in the source country, and that loan is passed on to like a shell company in the Caribbean or in the, you know, somewhere like that. And then that loan is then paid back by the worker at the local convenience store in Taiwan. I mean, this massive financial irregularities that are going on. And I think that the situation in Taiwan is the worst, because not only are these Taiwanese agents involved in illicit, you know, financial crimes relating to kickbacks, which are massive, both in Taiwan and Japan. But what makes the situation even worse in Taiwan is that they're charging a service fee to the workers, and that's allowed by the Taiwanese government. And I think we have to be very honest that this situation needs to stop. It needs to be exposed. And countries like the US, like the UK, shouldn't be turning a blind eye to these issues in Taiwan simply because of global politics. You know, the situation in Taiwan for migrant workers is terrible. The recruitment fees are some of the highest in the world, and it's one of the countries where the laws actually permit migrant workers to be charged service fees per month for services that are not even provided to them. So I really think that the situation in Taiwan is very bad, and I'm really disappointed by what I saw in Japan. You know, and Japan is again, it's quite interesting because Japanese companies actually recruit for Japan, right? So the Japanese agents in Japan are just involved in the worst kind of kickbacks, you know, the highest costs, the amount of money that's being charged to source countries. And Myanmar is a very sad example of the situation in Myanmar now. We all know about since the military coup. I was an advisor to the Myanmar government for many years and working with Aung San Suu Kyi. And we see the terrible situation in Myanmar today. And we see the exploitation of these Japanese agents taking massive kickbacks from the Myanmar recruitment agencies. And it's not limited to Myanmar, it's across the whole region. And so it's really disappointing to see that situation in Japan. So we cannot just look, I mean, the Korea is different because it's a G2G system, but there's still many challenges. But I really agree that someone would raise Taiwan, because I really do believe that it's one of those areas which we need the US government imposing withhold release orders on Taiwanese companies, you know, including semiconductor companies, including companies that are supplying to the global supply chain, because the situation is just terrible. And we need the Taiwanese government to change the law. And unfortunately, people are playing politics with this issue, and it's not getting the attention it needs simply because Taiwan is Taiwan. And again, I am not going to express my opinions on that specific issue. I love Taiwan, and I love Taiwanese people and Taiwanese culture. I really find it an amazing country. But the level of fees that are being charged and the debt bondage that exists, it's really something that needs to be dealt with. And I know FLA and organizations like RBA really need to be getting on top of this and need to be making their stand known very well to the Taiwanese government, that their law just needs to change.
Thanks for that. Okay, we've got a few minutes left, and I have a few more questions. If any of my colleagues would like to jump in, please feel free. I'll go ahead and keep going though. So Andy, are there specific mechanisms that you recommend for brands to actively engage with their suppliers to promote responsible recruitment? And how can brands monitor and enforce compliance with ethical recruitment standards across their supply chains, particularly in higher risk geographies or sectors? And then I'll also add, how can we ensure transparency and clarity throughout the recruitment process? And do you think advocacy efforts focusing on the inclusion of migrant workers in destination country labor and trade unions help? And are there any examples that you can share around that?
Yeah, I think the trade union movement has dropped the ball on this issue, you know, and I think that they're natural partners for responsible recruitment monitoring, you know, and again, we could look at, for instance, Nepal, Malaysia, you know, like the GFON and MTUC. There's, you know, and again, I think there's a lot of challenges in the politics, you know, but some of the Indonesian unions are involved. And I think there's a good example that, again, colleagues in Taiwan will be aware of Indonesian unions that are active in Taiwan, I think, in the fishing sector. But unions really are a natural ally to promote responsible recruitment, and it's simply not happening. And they need to be so much more. And again, unfortunately, for me, I see that as, you know, when I first started this work in Thailand, you know, companies back in 2005, 2010, they only focus on the four walls of the factory. So what happens outside of the four walls was not their problem. And then eventually companies over the years have realized that what happens outside of the four walls can actually dictate what happens inside the four walls. So they've started to focus on responsible recruitment as an integral part of their process, and also audits have started to consider that. We still have auditors going to a factory and saying to the worker in Thailand, how much did you pay in Thailand for recruitment? And the worker says, I paid nothing. And they say, okay, you're fine. Or you go to Malaysia and said, how much did you pay in Malaysia? They say, we paid nothing. And they're like, okay, you're fine. But of course, all the money was paid in the source country, right? So you have to go back to where they were recruited. And so trade unions often focus, unfortunately, and then this goes all the way up. And again, I've been very open and transparent in engaging with ITUC and BWI during the World Cup in Qatar, and saying, you know, you can't just focus on the four walls of your company and say that decent work, it means decent work in the workplace. You have to look at responsible recruitment. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done with unions to ensure that they play an integral role in promoting responsible recruitment. In terms of the brands and the buyers, I want to give an example, you know, and again, it's not always good to highlight specific cases, you know, so I won't name the company because they are trying their best in many ways, but they have a responsible recruitment policy only for the Thailand and Malaysia. So it's like you have a responsible recruitment policy only for two companies, and then the issue is that you do very little to actually implement your responsible recruitment program. So on the first level, you say to your buyers, you have to pay for responsible recruitment. You have to do responsible recruitment, but we won't give you any money, you know, or you have to do responsible recruitment, but we will keep sending you orders at last minute. So you have to suddenly get lots of workers. So you can't have a policy by a brand or a buyer that it doesn't incentivize what they're being asked to do. So, you know, if you have a company that just says, okay, do this, we're not going to pay you. We're going to rush you to deliver the goods. And we're not going to help you in any way, shape, or form. We just tell you to do it. And that's obviously what's happening a lot of the time. So one of the things that I feel that, again, brands and buyers need to understand how to responsibly recruit. They need to understand the complexities involved, and they have to help their suppliers to do it, you know. And it means that sometimes they have to mentor their suppliers. They have to support their suppliers. They have to support their recruitment actors throughout the process, you know. And I feel that, but at the same time, when I look at the situation today globally, and I think I would give the example, for instance, of Sime Darby plantations in Malaysia that I've worked with. They are probably one of the most experienced actors globally for implementing a large-scale responsible recruitment project. You know, they've recruited almost 20,000 workers through a responsible recruitment project. And they are far more experienced in responsible recruitment than any buyer or brand of palm oil, you know. And we really need to focus on hearing that experience as well, because some of the suppliers really have so much knowledge, so much skills, so much experience that their buyers don't have. But at the same time, the buyers really need to be practically supporting the suppliers, and the suppliers need to be supporting the source country recruitment actors. So we really need, and again, I would say, we need pilot projects, we need practical advice. You need to pay the price. You need to incentivize, and your purchasing practices should not undermine your policies. So it's fine to have a responsible recruitment policy, but you shouldn't then undermine that through the way in which you deal with your suppliers.
Great. And so I'm going to throw one last question in before we run out of time, but just a note to everyone that FLA can consider putting together an annex of the unanswered questions into the recruitment guidance. So Andy, do companies have to perform an open tender every time they would like to recruit more migrant workers? With all the investment, such as time and money, you need to develop the capacity of source country agencies. Is it feasible to start over every time you recruit?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that, and I do projects where companies refuse to do this, you know, they really refuse to do open tender processes, and they say, we want to carry on. So listen, as an individual advising companies, I can work in all situations. If they give me 2 agencies and they say, make these 2 agencies ethical, I can do it. But I feel uncomfortable because I always believe there's a very high governance risk that the existing agencies are paying bribes or kickbacks to the HR departments, you know, that there's some kind of a governance issue. And for instance, you may not get the real costs of recruitment, you're paying more. So I think, yes, it's possible not to do the open tender process, but I think there's huge governance risks. And also, I think that buyers and brands really need to be promoting the open tender process, because it's a way to promote the development of a responsible recruitment market. You know, if you don't incentivize being a responsible recruiter, then people won't do it. And so we have so many situations now where the most migrant worker demands, the most recruitment is going to the companies that are the worst, right? And we need to turn that around. So I think it's really essential to do this open tender process. But also, of course, I do believe that if this open tender process was done by a group of companies, like for instance, the FLA could do an open tender process for Malaysia, and then they could come up with a list of the agents, rank them. They could rank the agents, or RBA could do it, or for instance, Adidas or McDonald's or someone could do a global, you know, effort. You know, it doesn't need to be one company, one open tender process. You know, if a lot of companies came together, for instance, the whole gloves industry in Malaysia, or the RSPO, the palm oil industry in Malaysia, if they came together and did an open tender process, it would be much more effective in terms of time and money. Yeah, I think that's also the case. But I really do believe that an open tender process, and again, it's every parts of business people have, like especially governments, you know, procurement policies, you know, you have to open the tender, you have to have a legitimate process to select your suppliers based on cost, based on quality. And that really should apply also to the labor supply chain, you know.
Great. Well, with that said, thank you, Andy. We are out of time, but we really appreciate your collaboration on this guidance. And thank you to everyone who supported the planning of this webinar. Thanks to those who participated and sent questions in. Please do keep a lookout for the public release of the guidance on FLA's website within the next week. And with that said, thank you and goodbye.